and hi. Okay, so what I was saying, there was, uh, we had added some. Let's just kind of rewind a little bit here, because I messed that up. Uh, we had added some self lighting in there. Yes, I speak. Self lighting in there from some of the nodules in the body, and wow, everybody responded really fast. Thanks for that, guys. So we had started adding some self lighting on the body here. Let's go and kind of take a look at what went on there. A little bit higher up. So the spore glow. This is where I'm coming in and starting to give some of the glow to the spores in there. So I start kind of adding that to her shirt, the belt loops, the top of her jeans, the buckle, right? So I'm keeping that on a separate layer, and I'll return to that as we keep kind of finishing off some of those things in there. What I went on to say as I popped up that image and you guys couldn't hear me talk was that I also want to maybe fill in the background a little bit. You don't have to do this with asset production designs. You can leave it as a very basic backdrop. The nice thing about that is it's not distracting, right? And so for me, it's sort of, I'm going to play more with a bit of the presentation of the space. I feel like this character, inspired by The Last of Us, pretty much any zombie IP, is that these characters are wandering around sort of empty spaces from cities and places like that. So I've picked out something for our zombie, which you've already seen when I was miming through this. We see this kind of cityscape. You see that the sidewalk closed sign is backwards. I'm not really going to show much of that in my final view. I flipped this so that the perspective works pretty well with the way she was walking, the way she was set up in perspective. So that'll be a good place for me to start with the shot. And so one of the things that I would do right away with this, just so I don't have this blaring thing and see the way I've kind of finessed some of my painting, is I'm going to add a mask to it. And I'm going to just fill it, get rid of that, right? We can see the original kind of perspective lines in there, and they fit pretty well with the image that I brought in over top. So now that we have that space masked out, I can get in here with a brush. I can go into my brush settings and I can squish that down just so I can make like this brush that maybe fits a bit of our perspective a bit better. And I can come in here and I can start to bring back almost like there's a street light shining on this character. Bring back some of that detail. We could elect to maybe bring some of the top portion of this back a little bit. Maybe we're thinking dying light of the day, right? Just starting to light up some of those aspects in the background there. So we could use that. I've comped in another image where I have just this very dim city skyline disappearing in behind her there. So I'm going to leave that there as sort of just a way of blocking that out. I mean, a lot of times I'll try this stuff, at least just rough it in. If I hate it, I can always find something else, right? So allow yourself that opportunity to play with things still at this point. Don't be too hard on yourself if you feel like it's not going well. So we have that. Our foreground is not super dark. I would add another layer. I'm going to call that to my vignette. And we're just going to vignette the edges of the frame more towards black. Okay, so I'll have something kind of softly kind of edged in there. Maybe kind of cut some of that side of that spotlight out a bit. And and that feels pretty good. I might go back to that that mask and actually kill a little bit more of this off. I feel like it's just a hint too light. Underneath that, I could do a blob shadow. I mean, you could get into trying to paint a cast shadow of this character on the ground. Certainly, if you're using Daz, you could set up a light and actually cast a shadow. For me, I'm just going to use this nice brush that's diffused to set up some of the way this looks in here. Just to, it helps anchor the character to the ground, right? Obviously, if we don't have a shadow underneath a character like this, it's going to look like it's floating, right? There's going to be no sense of connection with that ground underneath them there. So, not bad. We've got that turned on down here, so should we go find that? That works for now. And again, that's sitting on a different layer, so we can always come back to that, right? It doesn't have to be that we again stick with the things that if we find they don't work later, there's no reason we can't change that stuff. So this allows us to kind of see some of the darker areas of the body, the lower section, which we dimmed a little bit with our lighting. And in the upper section is still really bright against that backdrop, which it has a hint of light in it. But that's more for us to be able to establish some interesting, subtle background elements in there. Okay, so let's dive back in to some of the spore development. One of the areas I wanted to kind of focus on is some of the t-shirt spores. So the stuff that's coming out of her rib cage and then the pelvis and the gut in there, that stuff's fine because the t-shirt's lifting up over it. The areas where the t-shirt is, or the spores are kind of pushing up through the t-shirt, those are the areas that I would want to spend some time with, just because I feel like we want to establish how the spores are actually moving through the t-shirt. I was thinking, just in terms of troubleshooting that, you know, spores are likely, I mean, maybe they could mesh through the cotton, but we've only got a couple of places where that's happening. Otherwise, in the jeans, there's tears, right? So I might just go with this character was attacked, maybe bitten through the shirt, that has open tears in the shirt. That's why those things would grow out of that section. So, hey, Chris. So we want to go and find that area. So this is our spore glow, right? This is where we're adding a lot of that stuff. We have our smoke, of course. On top of that, I might go torn shirt and set something up where it looks like we've got some wear and tear on the shirt. Now I could do this in spore glow layer and have that glow kind of light up some of the tears in the shirt. So I might start actually with that and kind of get in there and hit the, I guess, the fibers of the shirt that have been torn open to allow some of this stuff through. I have some of that stuff span in through there, so it looks like it's pulling on those surfaces. Right. Then that way I'm leaving myself that torn shirt as a layer where I can maybe get some opaque paint on top, change some of the values in there, so that that feels integrated. It feels like maybe there could be like blood stains on the shirt where she was bitten, and that those have dried and become a darker value, and then the light stuff comes up out of that, which is a really nice contrast, right? So I'm trying to set it up so it's easier to read for the viewer in there. So we'll get some of that here and there. That torn shirt. So just trying to break up a little bit of the strokes that I put in there. Right, maybe I start putting a little bit of pattern or detail to indicate the damage that was done there. Maybe some splatter. Make it with something that's a little bit closer to black, or maybe we'll kind of mine for some of this dark red, right? And then have that be something that looks a bit more like it's being pulled up or pushed out of the way almost, right? You can also grab some extra value and have that round around the outside to make sure that those fibers look like they're pushing off. So just even like a really quick turnaround on that. And we build something, I think, that just feels a little bit more believable in total. So we want to do it on the other side as well. So I'll start with the Spore Glow. We'll come in here and maybe we'll pay it some love and attention. Oh, weird. My stylus is not picking up on the Coolerus. Color picker, that's strange. I have to figure that out at some point. So the reason why I would have this open is to have the sliders, the HSV and the lab sliders open. So we can do that in our colors. I'm just going to use this, I guess, for now, just because my Coolerus extension seems to be a little bit buggy today. So again, just kind of switching around. I mean, I could use these swatches as well. I'm trying to just pick some more randomized colors in there so that not everything is kind of this orange. I want it to be fleshy and have the hue shift a lot in there. So, and you can see that we got oranges and pinks in there, reds, right? And same thing up here. So just trying to do that for any of those other areas. So finding out wherever that would make sense. I can just color sample from other spots as well. How to make that work. So some of this is depending on how you feel about rendering. Some of this may feel like busy work to you, but you know, after time spent on it and really kind of finessing what these things are supposed to look like, or trying to achieve that vision that you have, it's definitely going to feel more fully realized if you spend time on it, right? And that's always the problem with a concept artist, is we don't necessarily get infinite amount of time to finish pieces. So sometimes you got to leave things a little bit less finished, which can be a bit painful. I think a lot of artists would prefer to be able to finish, but I would end up doing, and I tell my students this, I would end up doing about a piece a day, an asset a day by the end of the project. Not like I would do that, I would only have 1 day per piece, but I'd spend longer on some, shorter on others. By the end of the project, I'd end up with like approximately 350 or 370 pieces. But you can imagine that's like, some of those are pretty sketchy to be able to do that many. And some of them are, like I said, a lot more cleaned up. So we've got that. We'll use the Spore Glow once again to start to speak to the torn fabric that's receiving that light. Just trying to get those little kind of cotton threads being hit by that light as they're pushed out of the way by the shirt. As a start, we'll go up to our torn shirt, just like the other one. We'll start to use some of those darker values to maybe embellish the old stains on it right up to that edge. So we're setting up language, right, for this to feel like it's been affected, and not that just these spores are kind of randomly growing up out of it. Has anybody been able to play The Last of Us? I played a little bit, but became busy with other things. I like to try and savor games, which means I end up not finishing them. Oh, you already finished it, Patrick. Wow, don't spoil anything for anybody, but how did you enjoy it? It was amazing. I'm glad to hear that, because I hear grumblings. I try and stay away from any sort of video game journalism, because it's usually pretty toxic between the commenters and some of the writing. But also, I feel like some people have really not liked the second version of this game for whatever reason. Again, I won't read into it because I don't want to know. Yeah. So I'm glad to hear somebody enjoyed it. Yeah. So get some of that in there. Might pay a little bit of loving to these areas on the edge. Just make sure that we're on Spore Glow still. Okay, get something really earthy in there. Just installed Photoshop today. I don't have much time for games, but I've yet to finish the first one anyway. The first one was a good one, I think, if you're ever going to finish one of those games. I don't know what the ending of the new one's like, of course, but the ending of the last one was pretty epic, pretty powerful. Especially with some of the decisions you get to make. But yeah, I mean, it's free time's at a premium, right? I mean, lots of people want games to last long to get their money's worth, which I totally understand. But for myself, to have to sit through 40 hours, for instance, that's a number that people like, 40 hours of gameplay, I just can't do it anymore. Because it's sort of like dedicating multiple weekends to that, right? And of course, I'm the head of the department of the concept course. I have my own students. I have personal project work I want to get done, right? It's just like, oof, I wish there were like just more hours in a day so I could get to that. So I'm jealous of people that have time for that. We'll see how it goes. I have God of War. I haven't even got close to getting very far in that. I bought Spider-Man, kind of played it, and didn't get very far in that either. So I'm not the best example of somebody that finishes games. My Steam library, for instance, is full of games I haven't even loaded up. I've got hundreds of games and try and make use of them. 10 to 20 hour max. Yeah. I mean, I tend to actually play more shooters than anything, and I think, well, I like them obviously, but otherwise I wouldn't play them. But for me, they're nice because I can kind of load up a game for 15 minutes and then quit and not have that be like a time sink, right? So again, that's just me. Might be able to in the holidays, full time. Yeah, I mean, it's just it. Like, if you have time, you have time. If not, it might be just a kind of phase in your life, or just what you're kind of invested in otherwise. But yeah, it's just sometimes just too much, which is fine. I also bought the remake of Final Fantasy VII because it was one of the only RPG games I ever completed on, I think that was PlayStation 1. So the nostalgia got me, but I don't even think I got out of the first level, right? I think I even had to uninstall it too because my hard drive was full for The Last of Us 2. So brutal. Yeah, maybe holidays I'll reinstall them, see if I can kind of get back into them again. Trying to get all this little gore going on in here. If I had a ton of time with the client to work on this, like especially for the stream, I want to move on to some other things just so that we can kind of keep the pace up here. But if I had a ton of time, I'd really love to kind of come in here and spend a lot of effort with the gross elements of the guts and the fluid and all of that in there. But at the same time, we really want to get to all of these elements so that we can have at least touched a lot of this stuff, right? For us to be able to kind of get a general pass done, and that not one area has been kind of abandoned in terms of effort. So some of the stuff will be impressionistic even, right? In its own way. But just enough that we maybe add some sort of tendrils or slime or goo to some of them. That one's not bad. Do want to get some of the glow going. I'm going to add linear dodge to this as well, just so that we can start popping that. I want these things to, adding the spec to these things to really kind of pop that kind of volume of them. A little bit. Only got a few more to go, and then we can move on from these guys. So for those of you that didn't catch the life drawing stream on Monday, we did worked on some continuous blind contour and massing to kind of free up the old imagination, try and get the mind fixed with the motor skills. Practice that stuff with not a lot of we're not heaping a lot of pressure on ourselves to get things looking perfect at all. So if you didn't catch that, you can always watch the replay of that. But yeah, it's a really, really handy way of trying to tie your brain in with, or I guess train your brain with your hand. I tried the no-look sketches. They are, I mean, they're terrible in a way, right? If what you're looking for is verisimilitude or precise translation, right? But by going through that, you know, it really is about just training the brain. You know, if you can get over the fact that it doesn't look amazing as you do it, you know, it's going to be better for you, right? I think it's a really good way of kind of getting out of the let's say preciousness of line drawing, especially if you're not new to drawing, because I think everybody draws from when they're kids in some way, shape, or form, but new to trying to build that skill, right? Unlearn the perfectionism. Yeah, I mean, in a way, in some cases, it's good to have an eye for detail and quality, right? I mean, that's what we're trying to do here. But for me to feel comfortable sketching and not kind of be afraid almost of this, because this thing is really hard to control, you know, that's a really good way to relax that, I think. So let's go to jeans. I'm going to just get back into that mask and get rid of the part of the jeans that are spanning over top of our where is my jean layer? There it is. Okay, the texture. Not even looking at my own labels there. What model application? Yeah, it was DAZ 3D, as Patrick pointed out. Yeah, it's really good for posing, I think. And it's fairly straightforward in terms of how to use it. So, yeah, it's a good modeling or posing application, especially because you can also change, you know, the body shapes. You can pay money for different models and clothing and stuff like that. So I've seen some people really kind of go to town on buying hairstyles and clothes, and I think now you can actually use some of the physics in it to have the clothing actually fall properly, right? Simulating fabric. I haven't looked into that too much, but there you go. So this is feeling pretty gross, pretty good. Got rid of that part of the jean over on that side. Let's go back up to Spore Glow and tuck into some of the glow on that. Yeah, it's an interesting difficulty. I've actually find myself doing it because I enjoy stylized work a lot and very painterly work. Part of the side effect of having to do this kind of stuff for clients all the time is you get used to certain methods of production, and you can find yourself kind of falling into a trap of every time making everything you do a realistic, highly polished, non-painterly piece. So sometimes it's got to spend some time breaking yourself of the habit of cleaning things up to this perfect render, right? and letting some of the stroke economy shine through with the, that stroke staying visible as a texture, as an element, and building that out. So I had to do that. I switched from when I worked on Crash Bandicoot, I would switch from working on that to going over and working on Prototype at the time, which are vastly different art styles. And so it took me a couple days to kind of break myself of the kind of cartoony nature of things. But I could do it. It's just I had to kind of get my head out of a certain way of working, which was interesting to say the least. The new Crash game looks great from Toys for Bob. Very colorful. They're going back to the original design. I'm not super fond of that design itself. It's not because I worked on something different than that, but more of like the Endless Runners were never my favorite kind of game. I don't think that the original Crash game ages that well either, but I'm sure some would argue with me about that. Putting a little bit of a rim on these guys, sort of like some of the other nodules are lighting each other up. That's allowing me to kind of see some of these forms as well as they round around the body in there. Have some of that fade off into that green fleshy stuff in there, which is, I think, works for us. Do you have a drawing where you are most proud of a drawing? Any one drawing? Not really. I'm most proud of looking back on an area of work and seeing that I've made progress, right? I'm typically not someone that loves their own artwork no matter what. Maybe it's a strange hang up for myself, but I always see the problems in it, right? I mean, it's maybe the analytical part of my brain in that I'm thinking of what I could have done better all the time. So I'm in that mindset of learning, right? So it's hard for me to gear down into appreciation mode, right? So if it's been long enough since I touched something, and I can look back on it, I'll be more fond of it when I've kind of forgiven myself for the problems that I've seen in it. But yeah, it's for me, I guess, is more of kind of like a body of work thing. So definitely one of the times that I noticed this was when I had started as a concept artist all the way back in 2005. I made a whole bunch of art for the game and kind of then we moved on to another game and I have a group of work for when I worked for that studio during that time, and I could definitely see that by the end of my time there I got so much better, right? And then after that I saw a couple of years worth of work and I got so much better again, right? So I would say that would be it for me, is those are the times. So the duck axe. That was like the first class, I think, with you, maybe. Duck axe. Yeah, wow. Wow. I completely forgot about the duck axe. I drew an axe that had a duck on it as the axe blade. Just a duck axe. Silly stuff. Yeah. Artist habit. Yeah. No, I think it's a good habit to have, to be honest. I mean, maybe I should lighten up a little bit on myself. But I feel like that's the way I stay in that learning mindset and not kind of rest on my laurels, right, with the work that I've done. in just being critical, not beating myself up and self-flagellating, right? Because this isn't the perfect work of art, but more of that's like, okay, yeah, so this, like, I do like the works. I won't tend to put them forward unless I believe in them. But it's like, okay, yeah, I got to get a handle on this more. I've got to do more life drawing, right? Because it's, say certain aspects of anatomy were unnecessarily hard in a piece, and I know that I didn't maybe have that difficulty before. So just those things, right? That we think about. Yeah, I can't remember when our class with the duck axe was, like what year that was. That was a couple years ago at least. I'm glad you remember it. Remember something, hey, from class. Hopefully, that's always the goal. Students remember. So I'm gonna come up into. I'm gonna rename torn shirt, and I'm just gonna say sort of. I want to name that layer in a way that just kind of indicates some general application of color or values. So I'm just gonna say overpaint 1, right? It's pretty general for me. We're dealing with the shirt. I want to start dealing with some of how these nodules are coming up out of the belt line. So I'm going to use that same layer for some value. So I'm just cutting in some shadow in here just because I want it to feel a little bit more the ambient occlusion to be more pronounced as it kind of fades down into the belt. Not have that be so flat. Give that some movement there. I've got this section in here that I got to deal with. It kind of almost looks like the flesh is kind of pulling open. So I might kind of just go with that. Actually start erasing a little bit of this stuff. Make that feel like it's kind of moving up over top. I can get myself into a little bit of trouble here with my destructive editing, but we're far enough along, and I'm going to imagine my art director said everything was all good, because I'm my own art director. In this case, right? But, you'd always want to make sure. So all good. So get some of that stuff kind of rounding at the top here. (2016, 2017). I'm glad that it's helped you, to be honest. Always good to hear, right? So that my efforts feel like they are worth the time spent. It's 4 a.m., right? You're in Perth, right? Am I correct? I can't quite remember where you're at. Yeah, anyway. Well, I'm glad you're up late watching the stream. That's very nice of you to come hang out. Oh, closer to Adelaide. I really liked Adelaide when I was there. I've been to more major cities in Australia than I have in Canada, where I'm from. So that's kind of hilarious. Adelaide was nice. Some good wine country there for sure, or near there. Moving to Perth. Perth is the hottest weather I've ever faced in my life. Oh my God, it was hot. But I'm Canadian, so anything's hot to me. But yeah, wow. It was an eye-opener for sure. Yeah, it seemed very calm when I was in Adelaide. It's very chill. Loved the little market there. That's really cool. The food in general in Australia is, I think, superior to the food in North America by far. I think just kind of more of a European culture, and emphasis on quality over quantity. Um, my take on it, anyway. Broome. Somebody's in Broome? Wow. Okay. So we're getting some more massing done on here, right? With that overpaint, we can see we're kind of getting the gut and sort of how it's kind of trailing off into the rest of the flesh in there. So I'm maybe going to put some creasing to make it look like it's going to kind of end up on her iliac crest, the kind of bony part of the pelvis in there, or be pinched up against that, right? And then that shirt can drop in over top and kind of make that a little bit more shadowy. Grab a little bit of that paint there. Have some of these things fade off at that point. And I'm going to go back to my Spore Glow. We might think about putting our Spore Glow on top, although it's a bit rough. I'll leave it on the bottom. And I might introduce another Spore Glow up here. So you know, some of that stuff's starting to kind of rely on each layer below it. That's fine, I think, unless your client is really picky about the way you're setting up some of those files. Let's get up into some of that. Thank you for the follow. Okay, we got some intensity on some of these things happening. So that's spec. We do have a spec layer. I'll actually put the spec on top because that should be on top. So I can be kind of populating that spec at any one time. But we got our Spore Glow down into here, so I can kind of build up some more of that on this guy. Cable Beach. Interesting. My wife is from Darwin originally. That's where the fam is at. Some of the, trying to really kind of follow the contours of this as I build it up. Let's see if we can get anything out of our compounding brush. There we go. Not sure why it wasn't working before. Some of that glow happening to the side. That fade into the jeans, into that gross skin underneath. Yeah, we're pretty happy. I'm pretty happy with that stuff by now. I mean, we get close enough to it, and it does feel very painterly. But at 100%, I know it'll start to kind of feel a little less kind of rough. So we'll give some love unto these guys down in here. Did change some of my settings in Photoshop to maybe get a little bit more performance out of this. It's running into a little bit of a problem with trying to paint while having other things on my computer. It's just Photoshop for us. Always a pain. Yeah, I did. I choose. Try and target sort of the shapes first, because those things are going to be important to kind of move off from. Maybe get some dimpling here and there. And I can get that glow going on. Turn it off of red by a hint, just so we can start climbing up into yellow. Here and there, right? Just looking also back at the top, we know that we're kind of traveling in between some of these things. So allow yourself to pick different colors and make that feel a little bit varied. And that'll feel better. Back to orange. The ground may, by the end of this, be a bit too bright in total. Again, just to reiterate what I was talking about before, is if it does, then we'll just knock it back, right? One of the things that I would do a lot, which I don't really do anymore, thankfully, when I was a newer artist, is I'd stress out that it wasn't looking right as I'm building it. And I'd second guess myself and get trapped in this silly sort of loop of trying to fix things before they're finished, because I was worried that they wouldn't pan out. And so if that happens to you, you know, just try and take a step back from the piece for a minute, and then remind yourself that, you know, you need to actually do some work. Sometimes that work won't look good in the very beginning, but it'll eventually pan out, right? So don't get too stressed out with that stuff, and don't get distracted, I guess, is the key there, by the things that you think are not going well. So spec, I feel like we're going to get some good spec out of this part of the body. So I'm going to go find some of the areas in there. Maybe all the pressure of the fluid pooling in the legs is going to make it start weeping or make it kind of slimier. All those really fun things. Which can help people get on board with the disgust. Okay. Not feeling too bad at that point. So let's use the Spore Glow to then just hit some of the fibers on the edge of, say, the pants here. Things that are going to receive some of the light from these lovely spores. I just want to kind of get the flyaway fibers. I don't want to get everything in there, right? So I'll try and hit just the rim of some of this stuff. So it looks like it's pulling open. It'd be a little bit weaker as it kind of flies away. Hit certain spots strategically where they're kind of flowing off into the darkness so that we can see that silhouette. Maybe even some on the other side there. So that's feeling pretty good. Good and gross. Okay, I'll turn off the spore smoke. Let's get back into that head at this point. So there's something that we can do at certain points in a piece, and you've got to really kind of decide if that's a good call for you. Is at a certain point where I'm getting close to final, and I definitely have the client on my side in terms of signing off on the piece, is I'll collapse everything into a flat painting file. Now that's where my workflow might diverge from other people's, and that's also where my workflow becomes dangerous, in that anything that I do from that point will have to be repainted, or I'll have to come back to the point where I moved away from non-destructive editing to destructive editing. So and then if any painting that I'll do, say, on top of the textures on her that I've laid in, like the jean texture, the cotton texture, those are going to go away if I start scrubbing things in, or blending. So I'm getting close to that. Maybe I'll kind of hold off a little bit, but I want to start making kind of broader strokes, so to speak, with some of the changes on her, specifically her hair. So I don't want to be kind of going from one follicle to the next and then going down through the layers and making sure the background sort of gray flats are being tweaked at the same time, right? It's a bit clumsy to work with something that small that way, so that's sort of what I'm trailing towards here. But we can always make a copy, right, of that. So I might do that here. So for that to work, I'm going to pull the background stuff into its own layer group. So we'll say BG, and then I'll move that down here. Close our process. We'll actually move our BG down with these other guys, and I'll also throw those in there to make sure everybody's happy. And we'll just get those guys underneath. Back to normal. I like to label things that are kind of major elements in the layer stack so that those feel good. So we have that. We can turn that off all the way to the backdrop now. And I can control select all, control copy, control paste, and that will merge everything and drop it in as a layer. So we have all of that working file stuff. So I'm going to engage in that divergence from the workflow stuff. So, I mean, at worst case, we've got a nice rough here that if I screwed up big time, I could come back and repaint some of that, salvage that, and move in a different direction. We could even submit this. It's still rough in a way. But it's a long way towards a long way from being kind of incomplete, right? We're closer to wrapping it up. So just be sure of that when you do this. So I'm just gonna collapse all of that into one layer here, and actually I'm going to undo that, because our vignette's on. I don't want this guy in here. He's sort of something servicing the top, the lens effect on this. So now I can copy paste everything that won't have that vignette on it. I'll bring this guy all the way up underneath vignette, and then I'll pick up everybody that's underneath all the way to the BG layers, and I'll throw those in a folder. And so that's my backup. So I can turn that off. I can turn the BG on, and we're most of the way there now. Okay, so I turn my process layers off as well. And we've got that going on. So some of that left some of the line work in there. You can see this little B down below. I can just select her, inverse that, delete that. So we got rid of it. So now we've got our fixed character on top. We've got our element, our background element down below that. We can go edit that. And now I can go in and kind of tweak that hair and clean some of this stuff up, right? So on that layer, I'll go in. I could mask it. I think I'm just going to delete it because I want that to be fixed permanently. I want the silhouette of these things to be fixed. So, yeah. You bought a Wacom today. Studio nearly complete. Excellent. Get used to that if you've not used one before. It can be a little bit of a... I was talking about this in the life drawing session, in that the friction is a lot different, even though they try and make this the Lexan sort of coating even on the tablets, if you're not using a Cintiq. They try and make those have some friction to them, but you still feel like you're skating around a lot more with less friction on these kinds of things versus pencil and paper. There's a way more friction, so you can kind of feel that and temper that as you pull the stroke through on paper. So yeah, it's a little bit to get used to, but I mean, if I'm digital painting, I think that the digitizers are great for that. Okay. So, grab an eraser, hopefully one that's sort of going to do some proper damage. And then I'm just going to kind of go through here and knock out any of those little bits that are dangling off our old drawing. For instance, any paint that has spilled outside of the boundaries of where we want it to be. And against this dark backdrop, it can be easy to see or hard to see. I can always pop this up, and then we really can go in and eliminate some of the some of that detail that we no longer want. Different ways of doing this. I mean, you can go and select by color and finesse that. Sometimes using selection tools, you still have to go in and tweak it. I find that I can usually just go in here and tighten these things up by hand, and with the same amount of time, right, spent. Using a bit of a textured brush in here as well. So what I'm doing with the hairs, I'm just going to start to block the larger hairs out. I don't care that I'm eliminating some of this stuff, because I can, again, get in there with a brush and bring hair back, right? If I really, really feel like I need to embellish some of the flyaway hairs and some of those shapes overall, right? So I'm not too worried about that as I get into fixing those areas. Some of these are fairly rough, so I might do some back and forth erasing and painting in here just to have this be ready to go. We see some of the strokes are ending in this blunt round shape, which I do not want. So get that carved up. If some of these lines get too finicky for you, just blast them away. Like I said, we're going to be able to come back in here with some more stroke detail to clean those hairs up. So if I'm just feeling like it's too annoying to kind of get into that tiny detail, then just knock it out of there. You're going to spend some more time cleaning that up at that point. And we are really getting a lot closer to this than when we started, right? So you can you'll detect when you're in that sort of polish phase if it's not completely obvious to you already, right? And that you're spending way more time tightening up tiny details and worrying about that silhouette, those small silhouette details. These 3 flyaway hairs, they're gone. Can't be bothered, right? That lump of the hair up there is something that I'll just use to start with some more line work. With this brush, I'm blocking the kind of major strokes first, and then I'll pick my brush up again and start again. One of the kind of more inefficient ways of working with this is if you continue to hold your brush and move all the way through these really delicate movements, and then you screw up. To Control Z, you kind of ruin all of that work that you just did, right? So remember to pick your brush up periodically so that if and when you do screw up, you're not kind of edit undoing all of this other this work. I'm actually really bad for that in my painting. So you kind of get entranced by the whole thing and forget, and then you screw up and it's like, oh no, I gotta edit undo and ruin all of that. Sometimes I'll just repaint whatever I screw up. So those are efficiencies that after years of doing this, that I still face, right? Or questions of efficiency or inefficiency. So, I'm not immune to it either. You can get lost in things and accidentally do things without paying attention. Like, my students know that I end up painting on their work a lot, rather than starting a new layer, which I've definitely tried to get better at, but sometimes maybe I guess I get too excited to get in there. Start erasing things, putting big red marks across your work. Yeah, unbind control. I actually rebind it to be step back through history, which Adobe finally actually added as the default not too long ago. I don't know why it took him that long. It's like one mistake. What about 100 mistakes? So my history state I set to 100 states, so I can step back 100 strokes, or whatever, 100 history states, no matter what I'm doing. Because it's sort of like, I feel like for me, I've gauged over time that I'll try things out, and sometimes it'll be a lot of painting before I realize, maybe that's not where I wanted to go with it. And I don't know, I guess I've figured that it's about 100 steps, or that's what I feel good about. Very rarely do I go beyond 100. But you can be surprised, like just some mark making, you can use up 100 strokes really fast and have only texturized a little area, and then you think about kind of moving on to another area, and then you go all the way back through your 100 steps. You're like, wow, I used them all. Okay, I've got to repaint that. So let's just go a little bit faster with these guys. Getting rid of those things. Does it make my computer mad having to keep the history states? Not my computer. I've never run into a problem with the performance other than cache. The cache, and you can change your cache in Photoshop. Make sure you set it to a drive that has memory so it can cache some of the actions that you've made. I've run out of cache because I've set it to say my C drive, and I've had too many things installed, and there's only like, you know, 300 megabytes left or something brutal like that. And then Photoshop's looking for maybe a gigabyte of cache space for temporary storage, and it can't find it. So it's just like, nope, you can't do that. Run out of cache. So I have, excuse me, I have SSDs installed in my my computer, so I set up the cache to run off of those, and so it's the access time is really fast, and then I just reserve those drives for caching, right? Which is not necessarily a luxury everybody has, but because I kind of do this for a living, it's something that I've made an effort to allow for when I'm building PCs, or when I'm setting up my drives, or even just saving things, right? Like getting rid of big video files from, say, old student feedback sessions, right? Things that I'm not going to use anymore. Just cleaning that stuff up so that I'm not chewing through all of that storage space. But I can imagine some older computers may be struggling with the history states. So, I mean, it's to each their own at that point. Pay attention to kind of what works for you. And if you run into those issues, then, I mean, you really got no choice at that point then, other than kind of freeing up some space and or just lowering the amount of history states you're going to be using. Yeah, Windows uses a lot of space just to exist. And one of the things that I've found eats up a ton of room on a computer is if you allow your computer to wake up or go to sleep. Sometimes what happens is Photoshop will save this temp file that's almost like 7 gigabytes big, just to be able to kind of wake your computer up at the same state. So that's something that I disabled on Windows, and I deleted that kind of temp file cache and got all of this space back, which was really nice. But I can't put my computer to sleep now, which is fine. You know, just turn it off. I didn't have a lot of these problems on a Mac. So I like working on Macs, but I'm not a huge Mac fan per se. So PCs are a little bit better for me in certain cases. Just with some of the file handling and stuff, I feel like access is a bit clunky, and I've been working with Macs since they've been around. It's just a personal preference thing, really. I think some people just love Macs. Not one of them. The one thing that's nice about them is they tend to just work a lot better with like the way the program associates to the OS. There's no huge, or I haven't run into huge hiccups with Macs in that regard. Whereas PCs sometimes are finicky. The way, say, Microsoft will put out a pen and ink patch for their tablet, for their Surface, right? And then that fights with Wacom, and it's just like, bleh, right? It's a mess. Where, you know, iOS is different for the iPad, for Procreate and their drawing tool than it is for any of the Mac OS stuff, right? So it's nice that they're separate, because then you don't have to deal with that stuff. So we got her kind of looking pretty good. I might go in now and start to kind of get those shoes looking good. So I feel like her shoes are going to be something more of like some dirty Converse. got somebody who builds a PC. That sounds really nice. I like to try to build my own PC. To be honest with you, I'm not good at it. So, but I like the kind of mechanics of it, picking the parts, and personalizing it in a way, the build of it. So I do like it, but I usually screw. One of the builds I made years ago now, I actually broke the trying to get the secure arms, the kind of snaps that hold your CPU to the socket. I broke one of the arms off, so I had to use whatever was left on the arm to snap it on, and I couldn't get it off after that. So don't get me to build computers for you. You wanted purple LEDs? Rolled his eyes. I mean, hey, that's why you would get LEDs, is sort of like your own aesthetic, right? It's like every streamer has some crazy LED setup on their computers as well. Makes it look very homogeneous in a way. Ah, well. So I want some filth on these shoes. I'll use a really dark brown in there. Yeah, if you've got an Apple, I think that, like I said before, I've had less problems with the programs working. Like my old Apple laptop is actually what my wife uses now for working from home, and it's a nice backup for me in case this thing tanks. But yeah, I've had it for years, and the thing still works well. I know Apple recently has been getting into trouble. Not recently, but in the past, for kind of making these things obsolete so that you buy new ones, by kind of pushing updates that make it inefficient to run, which is kind of skeezy of them to do. But sounds very corporate, very, I guess, predictable. That kind of vulcanized rubber around the edge of that shoe there. Maybe we'll just kind of add a bit more value to this front piece because I want to make it feel reflective and white, and then the other part of it feeling a little bit darker. Something like that. So again, here's something that's kind of painterly, but we zoom out, and that's going to feel a little bit sharper to us at that point. Right, yeah, the clean install. I find that's also a case with the graphics drivers on NVIDIA cards and the Wacom drivers, right? Feel like they make it work, but they patch it weird, and maybe that triggers some errors or something, but I don't know. Who knows? All right, let's give some love into the hair now. Just gonna come in and fill in some of the weaker kind of painted areas in here. So I want a brush that is pinched. So with just some pen pressure, I can get those hairs coming off of her head. I like to get a few flyaway hairs if I can, especially with a creature character like this, where their hair shouldn't be kind of perfect. You know, there's going to be some disheveled nature to it. So just find opportunities to do that. Maybe go and find some reference of somebody with bedhead. So you can see that kind of messy hair kind of sticking out. Maybe some of it's a bit kind of broken or bent, right, from the scuffles that the person got into before they became a lovely deadite. So is this like kind of that level of storytelling? Once again, it may seem like trivial, like really, you're gonna go into that detail with a zombie, you know, with details that are maybe not even going to be seen. It's like, yeah, absolutely, I'm gonna make that feel good. So if somebody is delving that deep into it, they're going to see that stuff. And the very worst, we might just get that reading as noise that feels good from a distance. You're coming through there. Some of the hair maybe wrapping out front of her face. Oops. So here's that big mass that we just cut short last time. So let's build that out real quick. I feel like we need some hairs kind of moving off in the other direction. Some of those flyaways again. I might even have some of the hair kind of coming off, almost that like the scalp has blossomed out with the plate of fungus. Just so it feels like there's some transition, some attachment to that, right? Be able to get some of that coming through here. Get some kind of coming up with there. It doesn't feel so like alien. Let's get some of that loving up in there. Chop out any of those little spots that we missed. Okay. Let's get that BG back in there. So now, you know, with that kind of laid in, I can lock the pixels on that, and I can start kind of getting into, maybe I'll go in with a linear dodge with some of this. Glow, get some of that glow coming off the hair here and there. go back to an airbrush maybe. Let's try and tag those hairs that we laid in. These guys over here are kind of better served being dark, right? But I can kind of paint on top of those a little bit to make them feel like they're being lit up by some of the light. Let's get some of these stragglers over here just a little bit brighter. I don't want them to disappear, obviously, into the darkness. So I'm just going to hit them with a hint of that. There's some oddities to this stuff over here. I'll just turn that back to normal, and then we can kind of paint that down so it doesn't look like it's glowing somehow. Let's get those guys up in there. Just kind of darken that stuff in there. All right. So not feeling too bad. Yeah, I might spend some more time with the specularity up in the top part of the head. With the background, you know, I've laid it in in a way that's fairly dim, so I'm not getting like the stronger sort of contrast in the shadows. So I might just make a copy of that layer and then set that to something more of a multiply. And I might grab the slider here and just really make it kind of just way more contrasty with my levels. See how that feels. Not bad. The colors may be starting to be a bit too intense on that, so I can always, on that layer, kill off some of that saturation. Change that to an overlay. It was a bit too blue. I had this kind of light layer of blue over top of things, and it just wasn't working for me. So get something going like this. At this point, you know, we want to think about kind of wrapping it up for client. We got this kind of general lighting over top. But, you know, I can maybe gauge how much of that ground I want to come through. It might be good for us to actually kind of fade that off a bit. I'll leave that top layer. This one, I might kind of let it sink in a little bit more so that she stands out a hair better. And maybe not that much, somewhere in there. And at this point, yeah, we'll get into some blooming. So we'll say some, call it EM for emission, bloom. Turn that to linear dodge. Again, I prefer linear dodge to color dodge just because it's something that I feel doesn't spike the saturations as much in color dodge as color dodge does. So we've got that, we're back in that zone. We've got our airbrush, and I'm going to be very delicate about the blooming on this, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to see something, whoops. I don't want to see something that I can spot that there is a Photoshop brush. You know, if I leave it on there, it gets this. It's not a hard edge, but it's a noticeable edge. I want this to feel like it fades off into the space around it. So another thing is like your opacity. You can take down your flow so it doesn't just keep spilling out of the airbrush, right? You can take that down a little bit, and then just start to really slowly build that up, right? I'm barely pressing. If I feel like I need a lot less intensity to the tip shape, then I can go in there and turn that down. So it doesn't look like I'm doing much right now, but I am slowly building up that effect, that bloom effect. Which, especially against the kind of dark background, is going to be thanks, Patrick. Be noticeable, right? That bloom edge. This is on another layer too, right? So we can, if it does go a bit squirrely on us, we have the opportunity of getting back in there and using our masking tools, right, to kind of eliminate the effect or just finesse it a little bit more. So I'm going to go a bit faster with it so that we can feel that. Add a little bit of that effect on the ground as well, because hey, she's going to be casting that light around. Get those blooms going on. And now I will go in and take some of the distance of that off. Let's get some of the bloom up in front of her face. Get into this now, and then just really softly start to, well, turn off linear dodge first. Really softly start to get rid of some of that rounded edge to it. Maybe try and follow the contour of the shapes that are emitting light. Let those feel good. Right. And then at that point, I can always take down the effect in our opacity. Take a look there. We can always stack these as well, right? Like if I copy this layer, you'll see that it'll intensify again. I may need to kind of go in and really blast out some of the halo effect on that. Alternatively, I could just start a new version of that and kind of go into the areas where I really want to make high impact in the dodging. All right, like maybe I'm not going to do any of the blooming on the outside edge, but I can kind of start to cover the face up with some of that stuff, or lower contrast in certain areas very specifically. Depends on what you want to do, right? We did lose our smoke layer to the processor, the backup. So let's go and copy the smoke, bring it up in here. And we've got her back. I might, because I painted some of that out with a darker value, I'm actually going to see if I can eliminate that effect by just using a screen mode maybe. Linear dodge. Linear dodge kind of works pretty well. So that dodge, I'll use this as smoke dodge, and then we can get that smoke. Dodging intensified. As that moves back, maybe I even get a couple of like flyaway spores. Some bigger spores, I guess. And I'm just tapping that, making little dots. So that maybe you'll just pick up the fact that there's these kind of little spores coming off of it. Make bigger ones and smaller ones. Maybe concentrate some of the stippling around some of the heavier parts of the smoke trail, and then I can kind of fade those things off. It might be nice actually to even have some of the spores coming off of the individual areas of where the spores are breaking through. So those ones would be kind of lit better by the spore itself as they get closer, because the light's obviously going to decay as it moves away. So she's walking around spreading the bad stuff. I'm actually going to turn this stuff way up because some of that stuff's really hard to actually achieve with such a light impression. There we go. May feel a little bit tedious to do this, but once you get enough of that in there, the effect will be a little bit easier to read and contribute, right, to the feeling of this character kind of sending off these infectious little spores. And we'll just pop a couple here and there. I'll get some more bloom coming off this leg down in here. Go back up to our smoke and just a couple more spores. I'm looking for those overlaps, those nice overlaps, and the darkness in behind it to help that read. Right. I might finesse that as they're like these things are all kind of leaking off this smoke. So like any exposed area is, you would expect them to see that smoke coming off. But you know, for our purposes, I mean, we could probably edge that in pretty quick though. You could use the marquee selection tool and then just feather the selection so the edges aren't sharp, and then you could go that way about it. For me, I'm using the airbrush tool, so I can make it smaller and make some of the swirls of smoke a little bit more concentrated, then make it bigger, and then have that kind of just generally fall off into the background there. See that kind of move in behind her, same as this. Maybe there's just kind of trails in behind her there. See that fade. So this is a good opportunity to actually pull out some of the darkness of her hand in there, because that's going to be smoke that's lit up, so we can actually play some of that silhouette off. And then we'll just have this kind of sweeping some of that smoke in behind her. And let's put a mask on that, just so I can get rid of some of those things if I don't want them. Let them kind of sink into the back there. Barely see that. Carve out some of the darkness on that hand. Alternatively as well, I can get in there with some of the bloom effect and hit the thumb with some stronger reflection. Those areas, so that we can see that edge if I didn't want to use silhouette. It might be just a bit stronger to use the actual light instead of silhouette against the smoke. See those fingers against her body there. Even some up into the arm here might be nice. Then at this point, you know, you see me, I'm building up these layers again. I can always collapse them with the same attention to whether or not I should be doing that at this point. But I can get in there with a speck layer to make some of these areas feel a little bit more gross and affected, like we're doing in some of those regions. Maybe even some of these guys that haven't kind of grown yet into full fungus. So yeah, I mean, like I said in the beginning, there's varying levels of completion on a project like this, but we've got pretty close with to where I think we could sell this to somebody as like, this is the zombie idea that we had for a zombie game like The Last of Us, where maybe it's easy to see and it grabs the eye a lot more. And so yeah, there we go. We've walked through how to use a visual aid tool like Daz to get a pose fairly quickly, so that we could spend all the rest of that time doing this kind of workflow stuff. So there we have it. So I mean, try some of those things on your own for sure, and you'll find your own way in there as well. Some of the workflows will be different from artist to artist for sure. Yeah, and I mean, this can be a way you build artwork for your own portfolio, is to be inspired by something like a game coming out or a film coming out, and produce something for it that's from your own imagination that fits well in that world, right? That way you don't have to do all that world building outside of it, and but you still own the asset, right? So you're just working with the inspiration at that point. . Okay, so that's the stream for today, gang. And what we got here? Loving the night smoke combination. This looks really awesome. Chris, you're enrolled in the concept course, but you're not starting till August entry now. Couldn't quite build your studio in time for the July start, but it gives you a bit of time to get used to the Photoshop app. I received the Wacom by the 7th. I'll still get to brush up with these lessons. Well, good. I mean, you're still going for it, so that's good to hear. So awesome stuff, and hopefully you get the studio set up. That'd be great. So yeah, well, okay, we'll end there. But invite you guys to come hang out on Mondays for the life drawing stream, and we'll be working on that stream on some angle of alignment and directional thrust of body parts, and some volume study and some negative space study. We'll try and fit all of those things in there, see how we go. But otherwise, yeah, have an awesome weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next time.